Welcome everybody to the Renaissance Humanism podcast. Today's podcast, I'll be talking about world orders, what they mean. This is nothing anything to do with Alex Jones, Kim Poole, those kinds of world orders who talk about conspiracy theories and things happening in the background, like some sort of men in hooded hats, like something from the Assassin's Creed games. What I'm going to talk about today is world order in the sense the international framework that existed before 1945 and after 1945. For this podcast, I'm going to do this in the broad strokes, just because there's a lot of information here and a lot of human history to go to. Now, to begin with, the world order as in the global north, as we understand it today, did not exist before 1945. It's over 77 years old now, the order had been existing in. Previously, since the fall of the Roman Empire in 476 AD, I believe I've got that date correctly. I might be off by a few years, but I'm pretty sure that's the precise date. When Rome fell, the Western world as we understand it turned to anarchy. In that time period when Rome existed, there was order, there was peace, well, relative peace, which was available in the ancient world and antiquity and the early medieval ages. But peace in the sense that nations of Europe wasn't battling out for supremacy, just because there was one order, and that was the Pax Romana. This is not a pro-Roman statement, just saying facts. Now, from the collapse of the Roman Empire in the 5th century until 1945, Europe was a war zone, a battleground, where you had the Holy Roman Empire, which became Germany, which also at one time was Prussia, and all the other German small kingdoms and principalities. We had the Kingdom of France, we had the Spanish kingdoms of Aragon, Gascony, Leon, Portugal, all battling out for supremacy as well as the old Muslim state of Andalus in Spain. You might have noticed that name sounds similar to the Andals in Game of Thrones, just because that's where George R. R. Martin got the name from. And we had all these nations, all these kingdoms battling it out for supremacy, which ultimately culminated in the Napoleonic Wars, where France made its first try, well, only try, I would say, well, technically only try, sort of. It's just, as I said, it's complicated, not to go into it. The French under Napoleon tried to dominate and conquer Europe from 1794 to 1815. The reason why they did this is because France, it has great geography, it has great borders. Uh, to the east, it has the rivers, the Rhine rivers, mountainous, that also makes it hard for armies to actually invade and conquer each other. To the south, you have the Pyrenees, so you have more mountains, so it makes France even more secure. It also has the Loire River. There's four major rivers in France, which is also great for river networks and transporting goods and services. So it has fantastic geography. And after it gets past the Rhine River, and it gets past those rivers on its eastern border, France no longer has the security, whereas on its established borders, which were established, as we understand it, under the Capetian kings from 987 until 1848, where modern French borders were actually established under that dynasty. Apart from the brief break for 20 years, due to the French Revolution in 1789 and Napoleonic France. A brief break of 20 years until there was another revolution in 1848, which saw the monarchy dissolve permanently. But as I said, that's why the French state had to keep on conquering Europe, just because that's the only way to guarantee security. Which is also a similar situation which the Russians are in today, because they want to get control of the Alpine Mountains. And in order to do that, the Russians, to get the security they need from their worldview, their point of view, they need to conquer Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Turkey, Romania, and Sweden and Finland, just to get the security which they need, which is it's still on paper, but that's the security dilemma they're facing. That's why they want to take Ukraine, and from Ukraine, see about taking other nations like Poland, which I listed off earlier. Now, again, Europe, according to Peter Zillan, is a geopolitical writer and author. He's wrote books, the United Nations, and the End of the World is just beginning, which talks about geopolitics, international politics, and understanding why nations do what they do. Because again, Europe, it's it has certain areas like Italy, Germany, England, and France. These are like geographical areas where power can rise up and eventually dominate the system for a time, but never totally. I missed out Spain. Spain's also in that list as well. Possibly they have certain areas in Europe have great geography, but it's not good enough to actually conquer Europe as a whole, like the United States. The United States of America has the best geography in the world, the best water networks in the world, and the best place for actually green energy as well, particularly in Texas. And because of those reasons, Europe has never had one power dominating it since the fall of Rome, again in the 5th century. Now, what this means is that for over 1,000 years since the fall of Rome, European kingdoms, European dynasties, and European nations have been battling out for centuries. And what this means is too much bad blood between each nation for one nation to actually develop a security and international framework that actually could create a time of peace. And this is where we get mercantilism from as well. Mercantilism is like it's economic imperialism, but it's not. There's more to it than that. It's like across the nations, we don't trust each other. We don't trade. But if you're trading with somebody, like if they cut off your supply, that means your economy will no longer function. You no longer get food. Like what we're experiencing now with Ukraine war, because of Europe's reliance on Russian oil, it put its own security, energy security, and its their abilities to be modern nations and do manufacturing at risk. And Europe is paying for this now. The UK is paying for this. Germany's paying for this heavy price for this as well. And that's something just to be aware of. That what each nation did, they built their own empire so they could trade. So they trade with the colonies. They sell their goods to the colonies. Even if those colonies didn't want those goods, they'll sell those goods. They'll buy those goods, and the all the other stuff will then be traded and imported back into the home nations like France, Belgium, Netherlands, Germany, or Russia, and Russia. And that's how it worked. There was no really true free trade as we know it. Because there was international piracy, and there was no really any really trade between each nation. There was international trade, but international trade within the empire structure. Now, during World War Two and World War One, all those empires were shattered and destroyed. And after World War Two, the Americans made sure the British Empire would never rise again, even though it wouldn't really be possible anyway, because just think if the United States could not win the war in Afghanistan from 2001 to 2022, then what chance did the British Empire of holding India back in 1945, 1948? The answer is zero. It'd be a joke. There's no things when you're fighting against people armed with spears. It's very different than when you got nations that have industrialization. It just wouldn't work. So it was no longer feasible or even practical. And that's what the Americans did after the Second World War. Rather than going the Pax Americanus and trying to conquer the world like the Soviet Unions did by conquering Eastern Europe and bringing it into the Soviet Union's sphere of influence, the Americans did something that no one's ever done before, and no one's ever tried since. They created a global free trade arrangement. What they did, they make it so every nation in the globe can now trade goods and services. The best way to imagine this is that rather than having one market stall where people go and buy their goods and services from different places. Now, all the goods and services are in one place, one stall, one shopping centre, and that makes it easier for trade. They also brought in standardisation as well. In the mid 1950s, they're bringing the metal crates, those big metal crates, those big metal crates and tankers, and they got bigger and bigger and bigger, just because of the security that the Americans created by guaranteeing the safety of the waters. And they did this at the expense of the American working people as well. I'd even go so far to say the entire working classes of the developed world, just so that third world nations that are developing could actually enter the global system and start trading on the value added supply chain. The supply chain, the places like America, places like Taiwan, places like Japan, and the West as a whole, they handle the higher end stuff of the supply chain. Like they do the UX design, they do the design work, they do the software development. But it's the nations at the bottom, like for example China. China still does most, I think it's 60% of the world's lower end semiconductors, and the rest is handled by nations that are higher up on that scale. Semiconductors are like the things that keep this laptop working. It's the actual the computers. The Chinese do the lower end stuff, and they also put everything together as well. So this enabled that nations to actually industrialize, to actually go up the value added chain. Now, again, why is this order important? All nations in Europe, all nations around the globe, apart from the United States, had blood with each other. For America, they only really pissed off the Mexicans in the American-Mexican War in the 1840s. And in that war, America took half of the Mexicans' lands. The other nation is Great Britain. We managed to burn down the house in 1812, and since then, after the Second World War, we've been shackled to the United States in regards to foreign policy. And there's even the possibility, a slim possibility, that even the United Kingdom could actually become part of the United States, just with the state of its foreign policy, its economy, and that it doesn't really have independence. And we're very much shackled to the United States at this moment, and the United States probably never going to let us go anyway. Another nation is Russia. Russia is the only nation that truly threatened the United States with annihilation. I'd say the British Empire and the Brits themselves with psychological scars in the United States for a time, but it's the Russians that threaten them with total annihilation. Now, with the war in Ukraine, they're seeing the opportunity to actually get rid of their old rival, Russia. Because this could very much be Russia's last war. Because Russia have had demographic problems for decades due to lack of investment. We lost 22 million people under Stalin's rule, most likely more. We lost another 22 million people fighting in World War II. And again, low birth rates. The last serious generation was back in the 1980s, and also since the 1980s, they haven't really been developing new skilled labour, so they've got shortages of skilled labour as well over in Russia. Because their nation is not liberal, immigration is not a way to replenish their population. Because again, the Russian Federation is an empire led by the Russian ethnic group, and they're predominantly in the west of Russia. So again, if you don't have enough children, you're not going to have people fighting wars, you're not going to have people to fight industry, you're not going to have people to keep the system running. And that's what Russia is facing. It doesn't have a replacement generation. Like Japan doesn't have a replacement generation. China doesn't have a replacement generation. There's probably going to be 600 million to 500 million Chinese by the end of the century because people are living longer but not having children. If you don't have children, you don't get new people. You get new people, sex, and children. You need at least 2.1 children to actually be at replacement levels, which society is not. Politics are going to be sideways there. It's all well and it's all interconnected. If you understand politics, you need history, you need demographics, you need international politics, and you need the culture to truly get like a truly in depth of this. I'm trying to keep this as bare bones as I can, just so the casual listener can actually grasp this. Just because we're going to be starting this from the 5th century all the way to present day. And in there, there's loads of wars, there's loads of famines, there's loads of demographic changes to understand, and just the way that society has evolved in that breadth of time. And it's all quite a lot to actually digest. Now, back to the order. Now, what the United States did in order to win the Cold War, they said we'll write everybody who's part of the Western Alliance or the Global North's foreign policy to win the Cold War. And in exchange, what the United States did, they guaranteed global shipping lanes for everyone, barring the United States enemies, the uh, Eastern Bloc, Soviet Union, and its allies. They did that and successfully won the Cold War. The Russians never stood a chance. It was because of the sheer prosperity the United States and the global North had during the Cold War period and accelerated after the Cold War period when the former Soviet nations, former Warsaw nations, started to enter the new globalized economy created by the United States. Now, at the moment, this order is at risk just because the United States is pulling its ships out of the Middle East. It's no longer patrolling the oceans, and that's putting global shipping lanes at risk just because it's very tempting for other nations to start stealing other nations' goods as well. And again, the United States was the only nation that didn't have the bad blood, like the British, like the French, like the Germans, to actually create the system. And now with the Americans going away, we could be seeing a reversion to sort of neo-colonialism or neo-mercantilism, where nations like French, the English, start to not so much carve up their own empires, just because, for one, the United Kingdom's demographics are bad as well. We have the Boomer generation didn't have children, unlike the French generation, because the French put steps in the 1990s to actually get their boomers and Generation X, that's the generation born after the boomers in the 1960s and 1970s, to actually have children, unlike, let's say, the United Kingdom, which has bad demographics but no way near as bad as the Russians, as the Germans, as the Japanese, as the Chinese. It's because when you go look at demographics, you've also got to see you've got your natives, then you've got immigration. Do the immigrants stay? Do they integrate? Is the culture actually stable? Are they actually being part of the society? And they're actually integrated properly? Create stability, create continuity, continuation. If people are just moving to the United Kingdom or any country for like 4, 5, 10 years and then move back home, they're not staying. I'm the children over it. And I'm the children over there, they're going to replace the existing population as well. That's something to think about as well, because certain countries, immigration and integration is not a solution for them. For example, the Japanese. The Japanese have more people that are adults in diapers than babies in diapers. That's not a good sign. A solution to that could be foreign immigration, but that's not going to happen because their culture is not as accepting as some place like England, France, Germany. It's a different cultural framework to deal with, which is very different to what we have uh, we have in the West. Now, again, I'm going to try and wrap this up now. What the order is, in a nutshell, is free trade. It's goods and services passing between nations, and what this enabled is nations in Africa, nations. If you didn't have steel, if you didn't have coal, you wouldn't be able to industrialize. If you didn't have aluminium, if you didn't have cobalt, you couldn't create the modern computer technology now in the Silicon Age. And that's what the order did. It made so everybody could industrialize and sell products and services. Without that, we wouldn't have the computers we have today. We wouldn't have the technology we have today, just because it enabled to actually it enabled the supply chain to have their value added to it. I like one nation could focus on building semiconductors. One nation could focus on building cars, and so on and so forth. And this enabled hyper specialization, which enabled me to use this technology now. One for hyper specialization. It wasn't for the global market stall made by the United States. Uh, Nations that we know today wouldn't exist. We want for the security. Places like Qatar, places like Saudi Arabia wouldn't have the population just because its population doesn't have the food security internally to actually feed its people. And without global trade, without the United States protecting the Persian Sea and the Gulf Sea, without protecting those sea lanes, uh, Saudi Arabia and Iran wouldn't be able to do this. Just because, one, they both hate each other, and two, neither nation has a seafaring tradition, unlike the United Kingdom, unlike, let's say, the Japanese as well, who actually have a deep water fleet as well, and they wouldn't have the actual security there to actually to do that. That means the countries that don't actually have a secure food supply, they don't have nations to protect their food. Without that, that'll go away. So they already created modern society, modern convenience, and modern technologies as we understand today. Uh, Please leave a like on the Renaissance Humanism blog, the Renaissance Humanism podcast, and also on Medium as well, please. Just it really helps the channel. Please let me know what you think of today's podcast. Do you like it? Promise you got anything anymore, just because I'm trying to keep it as brief and as concise as possible. I am just concerned that I don't feel like it might need me to explain things. And again, thank you for listening to this, and thank you for listening. Enjoy. Have a good evening.